Well, good morning, everybody, and good afternoon, depending on where you're joining us from. It's my pleasure to moderate this panel this morning that has been organized by the do tank StrategEast. We welcome a great panel on a very topical set of issues that deserves high-level attention, and we're very fortunate today to have a great group of leaders in this field. And so let me start by briefly introducing myself. My name is Matthew Murray. I am a stakeholder and friend to the organization StrategEast, and have worked on anti-corruption and anti-fraud in the public sector and the private sector, and as the founder of an NGO in the Eurasia region for the past 30 years. And so I've been asked to moderate today's discussion and to help facilitate a focus on two emerging trends that are a function of COVID-19 and all of the new, let's say, risk variables that it has brought to the financial sector across the globe, and particularly in the Eurasia region. I'm going to start by saying that, our theme today is based on the fact that banks must do much more remote banking. They must rely much more on remote services and technological services to detect, know your customer risk and other types of risk. And so the financial sector is much more dependent than it has been in the past on online and computer-based services to perform their day-to-day routines. And so during this period, this has posed a challenge to regulatory institutions, governments and banks, and the institutions that are especially responsible for financial services have been challenged to update and modify regulations to both facilitate and permit this type of compliance checking and anti-fraud and anti-corruption work. And while that has been taking place, the other trend that we've seen and bore witness to is that certain technologies that have been out there in the market are being accelerated in their use and have become more prevalent. And this has posed an opportunity for companies and individuals who are who are technologists and who are sort of leading edge technology pioneers to test out their new devices and mechanisms. And this has brought us to a point where we have a kind of critical mass of new experiences, and we wanted to share that with you today. So let me introduce our very stellar panel. We're going to hear from them in just a moment, but let me introduce each of them, and then we'll go to their presentations. First, we have Natya Gavizava from Georgia. She was the former head of the legal department of the Central Bank, or the National Bank of Georgia, and also head of the legal department of the Financial Monitoring Service of Georgia, and now she's back in the private sector as legal counsel for the firm Raizomat. Our next speaker will be Olesya Danylchenko. She has 19 years of experience in risk management in the financial services industry. She has worked as the head of the security department of Interbank in Ukraine. And she is now the head of the, she works for the Ukraine Interbank Payment System Association and represents Ukraine as a national member of the European Association for Secure Transactions. Our third guest is joining us from London today, and her name is Samar Pratt, and she's the managing director of the London office of a company called Exiger, which provides technology solutions to prevent compliance breaches and monitor risk in all kinds of business, including in the financial sector. She formerly served as Chief Compliance Officer at Barclays Bank in London, and is now, as I mentioned, the Managing Director of the Exiger office, where she works on financial services risk, including helping regulatory agencies like the U.S. Department of Justice monitor risk in specific banks. And so with that introduction, I'm going to ask Natia to start by discussing her COVID-19 experience with the Central Bank of Georgia and what she's learned from that and what she can share with us today. Natia.
Yeah. Well, first of all, let me thank StrategEast for this wonderful opportunity to speak on this panel. I think the topics that we'll be touching upon today are very important, very up-to-date, and very relevant to today's financial sector, and hope we will bring some clarity to business here. Well, my National Bank of Georgia experience was pre-COVID-19, and that's why I know that the perspective has changed. I left National Bank in January 2020, right before COVID-19 hit, and for past 10 years that I've been working there, I know how the regulator that the National Bank of Georgia has been cautious and very timid in relation to the new technologies that the financial sector was proposing. There has always been a push, and there will always be a push to introduce new technologies, new ways to do business from the financial sector, and that's the right way. And for the regulator to be timid and cautious, it's also the right way. However, COVID-19 has changed things very significantly, and it's really ridiculous that I have to happen to meet these COVID-19 challenges in a company which provides distance identification services for financial sector and other relevant sectors. And somehow my two experiences are interweaved, and the transition was really interesting for me in a way that I think that COVID-19 has changed many things, and you can see plethora of articles on the internet how things are going to be different post COVID-19. But for me, as a provider of distance identification service, and for me as a client of many commercial banks, actually 3 in Georgia, I would say that I would never ever want to be obliged to go to the bank office to receive financial service, because now what COVID-19 demonstrated, it is possible to receive those financial services in distance manner. And also it has demonstrated that even the regulators that seem to be very cautious of the new technologies, they have altered their approach to the technology, because there is, in the lockdown situation, there was no other way to ensure functioning of financial services than to be more open to new technology. And I'm proud to say that the National Bank of Georgia has demonstrated this openness, and it's an opportunity for Georgian financial sector to introduce distance identification services, other distance services in their portfolio, in their offerings to the clients. And I hope, more than that, I'm sure that in the future those technologies will stick. Well, for many years, the AML regulations, international standard setters, have recognized the importance of new technologies. However, they have always been cautious of risks, and they have always warned about the risks. They have warned regulators, they have warned the financial sectors. FATF, the Financial Actions Task Force, recommends the financial institutions and regulators to classify non-face-to-face business as higher risk. However, there have been changes in the approaches of the standard setters. Even the Financial Action Task Force said that the financial sector should rely more on the secure technology. However, I think that financial sector has to mitigate risks, and there are ways to do that. And I'm sure with the accompanying risks, it's really difficult to select the service providers that are really trustworthy and are implementing risk mitigation measures to the extent that is necessary to provide financial services. And of course, new technologies provide new challenges and also new opportunities, especially for my company, Raizomat. But I think that in the future, also the regulators, they will gain more experience on how to supervise those products. And also, unfortunately, criminals and money launderers, they are very inventive and ingenious in imagining the ways how to launder money, and also the technology has to be equipped and adapted, and also has to develop along with the risks and the trends in the money laundering to provide sufficient security to the financial service.
Muted. I am muted. Am I muted? Okay. Thank you, Natia, for that very interesting perspective from Georgia. And now let's hear about Olesya's experience with COVID-19 in Ukraine and across the region as a member of an association that monitors bank and financial risk and conducts information sharing on this subject in the region. Olesya.
Thank you, Matthew. Thank you, colleagues, for inviting me here. And I'm glad to see all listeners of this event. I hope that I will give some practical information concerning money laundering in Ukraine. As all we know that cyber crimes could never be resultive and effective if there were no people who help to get money in cash in results. So these people we call here and in Europe, they are called money mules. So those people that for some money give their cards, open accounts on their name, and these accounts and cards are used in the money laundering. Analyzing the results
Olesya, I think we may have lost you.
The percentage of money used in Ukraine are, unfortunately, they are males, almost 70%, and they are males in the age between 21 and 35 years. So this means that actually are in the most form to work and normally to earn their money. They became this chain that gives possibility cyber criminals to launder money. To reduce such risks in Ukraine and not to give such persons opportunity to go in different banks and open accounts there, we have such instrument for information exchange that is called Exchange Online, and the banks can exchange information about such persons. And besides this, the system is also used for exchanging information about actual fraud trends, not only in Ukraine, but also in the region of post-Soviet countries. Belarus, Moldova, Kazakhstan and Azerbaijan also are members of our association. Besides this, we have partnerships with MasterCard Members Association in Russia. So we all exchange this information, and previous week we have our joint online security forum meeting where all these countries were participated, and we all came to a conclusion that we have the similar trend in our region, that social engineering and card not present fraud is the most actual threats now, and they were the same before COVID-19, and this actually didn't change nothing, but we see that criminals moved in card not present, and in this environment even earlier than banks moved there. So they were well prepared from criminal side. And banks now are on the stage that they have to run for them and to make some restrictions for their activities. And probably that will be the same always, because banks' clients actually are less well known about new services, about new opportunities of banking service, of financial services than criminals. As we see in Ukraine and in our regions, all new services, first of all, are tested by criminals. Unfortunately, it is so, and they first receive benefits from this. What else about COVID-19? Of course, as far as we have this, our information exchange system that is working from 2001, so almost 20 years, we were well prepared in this area, so our information exchange didn't stop for any days, and although banks have to move in remote work, they can use this our system via web interface and via application programming interfaces as well. As far as the information checking is also possible this way too. Probably that is all that I want to share.
Ksenia, thank you very much. That's very helpful. And we will come back to the issues that you've identified. Samar, can you share with us your perspective from London and more broadly and across the globe?
Yes, thank you, Matthew, and honoured to be invited to this panel. So thanks to StrategEast for the opportunity to speak. So I guess based on what I'm seeing and hearing in the markets that I've worked in, primarily the UK, Europe, but also the US and parts of Asia Pacific, there's been a gradual shift in regulatory attitudes to the use of e-verification solutions over the last 5 years. And I think it's safe to say that what COVID-19 appears to have done is create the perfect conditions for more widespread acceptance and adoption of digital ID verification RegTech as part of client onboarding processes. And this is essentially to compensate for the lack of face-to-face contact with customers. So in my view today, there are far fewer barriers to using this type of technology than ever before. And historically, lots of firms, especially in financial services, have shied away from seeking new and alternative, innovative approaches to meeting their AML obligations, principally because of, they've been fearful of fines and reputational damage if their regulators find that, they're not meeting the required standards. So I think over the last 5 years, what I've seen in the major financial hubs, so, UK, Hong Kong, Singapore, the US, regulators have been encouraging proactively technology innovation in both financial services as well as the regulatory technology sector. So indeed, digital identification from a regulatory standpoint is enshrined in the EU Fifth Money Laundering Directive, or 5-AMLD as it's called, as there's a new option there for electronic identification. So since 2016, regulators in these financial hubs have been launching innovation hubs, inviting RegTech, FinTech participants, as well as traditional banks and technology companies to work on innovation, new products and services, to really in the interests of competition and consumer protection, but also improving AML regulatory compliance. There have been various regulatory sandboxes that have been stood up in the UK, Hong Kong, Singapore, and in other jurisdictions to allow companies to come together to pilot these new products and services and to test them in a safe, semi-live environment. And indeed, the US has done something similar with FinCEN and the federal banking agencies issuing joint statements in 2018, encouraging the industry to approach AML compliance and to be more innovative in use of technology. So I think that the types of technologies we're talking about in these sandboxes that these regulators have stood up include mobile payment services, electronic authentication, biometrics, blockchain, robotics, even augmented reality in some instances. And what's been really key, I think, to encourage this innovation is regulators saying that they're not going to penalize participants if the pilot programs ultimately prove unsuccessful, or indeed if they expose gaps in a firm's AML compliance program. But that was before COVID-19, right? And I think if you set all of this against a backdrop, there's been a huge increase in new fintechs in the regions, new regtech companies such as my own coming into the market with innovative products. And, in fact, e-verification methods, and I think Natia mentioned this, have been used extensively. They've been available for years, and they've been used extensively in the fintech sector and in the challenger bank sector here in the UK for a while now. So since COVID-19, regulators, I think, have gone into overdrive, if that's a term I can use. And while they've made it clear that they're not relaxing AML obligations of firms, they do accept that due to operational difficulties brought about by remote working, that firms now need to prioritize where to direct their limited resources. So the UK regulator now accepts that firms are going to need to take a different approach to verifying identity in the current environment, and they publish guidance, which has been very helpful in showing firms that they can verify identity remotely using electronic verification. So really, due to COVID-19, I think firms are now more likely to use electronic verification simply because they have no other choice, and obtaining physical certified copies of customer documents is difficult, and they're being encouraged not to do so to limit the spread of the virus. And even FATF is encouraging digital identity, use of digital identity verification, as Natia said. So clients I've spoken to recently, Matthew, have said that they're introducing this new technology into their CDD processes. They were incidentally introduced as workarounds, temporary workarounds, but since introduction, they're likely not to go back, right, to the way that things were done before, because they're enabling processes to be faster, more efficient, whilst also improving customer experience. So, out of sheer necessity then, I think COVID-19 has definitely accelerated the more widespread adoption of this technology in my view. And I think it's a trend that I expect is going to continue.
Thank you very much, Samar. And I'm going to turn with the stage that you just set, which depicts a trend in which there's regulatory adaptation to new circumstances, but also with an eye towards facilitating the way markets work under these circumstances. So it's something that is more deeply rooted than just the current crisis, the way you've described it. It's a trend that's been developing over time and has now been accelerated through necessity. And I want to turn now over to Georgia and Ukraine, which arguably, based on what we heard from both Ksenia and Natia, are in a position to leapfrog some technologies that exist in other parts of the world, because they are transition markets and they are led by governments which are very savvy about high tech and information technology. And in both Georgia and Ukraine more broadly, we've experienced over the past 10 years a desire to kind of change the culture of government service to become more digitized. So let me ask, Natia, why don't you start by answering the question of whether you feel like the regulatory leaders in your country are helping to push this new technology and reward the use of this new technology rather than penalize the use of this new technology.
Well, yes, certainly. As Samar mentioned, COVID-19 has accelerated many things, and one of them was the use of technology for onboarding clients. And certainly, and I'm proud to say that the institution that I worked for past 10 years has been really open about the new technologies, and their approach has changed significantly, which gives opportunity for the market to go ahead and introduce as many innovations as possible, also with the close controlling eye of the regulator. The regulator in Georgia has introduced regulatory sandbox, but for now, considering the situation, and as Samar mentioned, as face-to-face banking is becoming more and more difficult, the sandbox technology, the regulator in Georgia decided to kind of bypass sandbox technology for now, while the pandemic is still present. But however, in the future, regulatory sandbox will be used to the fullest extent, which is a fantastic way for financial institutions and also for the providers like Raizomat to test their technology and to make sure that the technology complies with the regulations. The good thing about openness on the regulator's side is that they have opportunity to gain more experience, more knowledge and more expertise on how to supervise these technology-based products and how to identify and manage risks, and most importantly, how to make the financial institutions manage their risks related to the new technologies. And also, it is accompanied with the risks inherent to situations like that, where institutions, technology providers, or sometimes even financial institutions use this opportunity to provide or to rely on subpar technology in the provision of these services. This, of course, is a challenge for companies, decent companies that that invest in security, that invest in complying with the regulations, where you see other competitors not implementing the same standards. However, this challenge is going to be there. I think it's going to be there for a while. I hope the challenge that in many technology companies that provide subpar services, it's going to be always there, I guess. But the regulators that will gain experience, that will gain knowledge, especially if they are as open as the government institutions in Georgia to the new technologies, they will have more and more tools to identify what service providers are good enough, what services comply with the regulations and requirements, and what are the risks and how they are managed in different service providers and financial institutions. Matthew, you need to turn your mic on.
There I am, sorry.
Yeah.
Thank you, Natia. Olesya, I was hoping you would address two questions at this point. One is the general question, which is on the table, of whether the government of Ukraine is adapting, as you would hope, to the regulatory requirements and reducing barriers to the use of new technologies or not. And then pull the camera back a bit and let's discuss what you may see in terms of trends among bad actors themselves. It would be great to get your perspective on whether you're seeing a rise in money laundering activities, for example, during COVID-19.
Answering the first question, I can tell you that our National Bank of Ukraine was a provider of changes during COVID-19. They have moved cashless instead of cash. They were proactive to push these cashless services as far as before. Ukraine was not very quick in developing of cashless, and only implementing of Pay Pass and NFC helped our people not too afraid to pay it with the cards in point of services. And when such services appeared, we have fixed a growth of cashless, but it was not enough. And now during COVID-19, really a lot of people have understood that cashless is more comfort than cash, because to get cash you can have first go to ATM to take cash and go to supermarket, and in case of COVID-19 they understand that it's better to use the card or some payment instrument instead of a watch or mobile phone to make payments. And of course with this trend we have seen that some clever guys have used this situation. We didn't see for a long time payment fraud in point of sales, but during COVID we have fixed a case when one guy was started to work in a supermarket. Besides this, he have bought for himself a skimmer, and besides of using card for payment, he also pushed it in the skimmer. As far as in Ukraine, we till now have cards with magnetic stripe. And after that, he had used this information for magnetic stripe and pins that he have watched during operations, and have completed operations in ATMs getting cash from these cards. So that was another side of our message move to cashless, because our technologies are not still on the same level as in other countries. We know that in our neighbor countries there is a very less percent of magnetic stripe cards, but in Ukraine it is still a very great percent, and it is our work that we have to move forward, because we understand that cheap technologies and NFCs, they are more secure, of course, than magnetic stripe, and that it is old technology. But that is what we have till now. These cards are cheaper for banks, and of course, for big projects, salary projects in Ukraine, they use this type of cards till now. And concerning your second question, as I told before, criminals have moved to card not present environment much earlier than our banks have moved there. And first, our services of card to card or person to person payments, of course, they were used by our criminals. Social engineering in our region, which leads to getting all information from clients that is necessary to complete payments in internet, is the main threat for all our countries that we have contacted last week. So till now it is actual. They introduce new methods. They use the phone numbers that are similar to banks numbers. They use alpha names similar to banks alpha names when sending SMS, and that is have no stops. This new trend of today, we know that they are calling clients, and besides that they, to give them understanding that it's really bank is calling, not fraudsters, they told them the security codes, because as we all know, it's a surname of your mother. As always bank recommends, your security word must be surname of your mother. So first they get some information about victims. They know the surname of the mother and told, I'm bank, you should be sure I'm calling from bank because I know your secure word. Your secure word is, and he told the surname of the mother, and it works. People, even if in the beginning they are not sure that it's called from bank, they begin to believe such people, and they give all other information they receive in SMS as to complete operation, and so on and so on. It's I don't know, social engineering is very well working in our region. I don't know why. I know that in Azerbaijan people are not so they do not believe so much to criminals, but in Ukraine, Russia, Belarus, Moldova, and Kazakhstan, it's really a new threat and a big threat. And what is new that they started to make payments from one country to another. So if crime is completed in Kazakhstan, the money is laundering in Ukraine. And otherwise, if crime is completed in Moldova, the money is laundering in Kazakhstan. And it's very difficult to trace all of this. And of course, it's very difficult to our enforcement with this all restrictions in borderings. And so it's the main threat for our region now.
Thank you very much, Olesya. That's very helpful. Samar, could you give us your take on the rise in risk, the type of risk that's on the rise, and sort of how this is being, how COVID-19 factors into that?
Yeah, sure, Matthew. So I think I see all of the things that Olesya mentioned there. I think those sorts of things are happening, I would guess, everywhere. The amount of fraud risk has gone up exponentially. I think Europol and various other law enforcement agencies here in the UK as well have commented on how there's a huge increase in fraud. And actually, given the impact on the economy, given the economic downturn, the opportunity for criminals to I guess hide behind traditional trade flows and money flows has reduced, just simply because those businesses aren't operating. So there's an increase in supply chain fraud. A lot of governments are offering packages to assist companies and individuals during the crisis, where the businesses have ceased to operate. So they're offering payments in lieu of, I guess, trying to keep the economy going. And there have been an increase in fraud reported linked to these relief efforts of various governments, including the UK, where fraudsters have essentially tried to claim these benefits fraudulently. I think there's also a risk of increased supply chain fraud as well, particularly in the healthcare sector, where we're seeing some fraudsters actually being held to account, where they are purporting to manufacture critical items that are required in the fight against COVID-19, so face masks, hand sanitizers, ventilators, and these companies are, the individuals behind the companies have no capability to actually deliver the goods, so they've fraudulently entered into contracts and then failed to supply them. And I think there's more sophistication, again, around these frauds, because, quite frankly, I think the economic downturn has forced the criminals to be more inventive, and in order to generate their criminal proceeds. Bribery and corruption risk, again, is on. There's a risk of an increase in that whenever you've got these government stimuli packages, as well as charities raising funds to assist COVID-19 relief efforts in some of the poorer parts of the world. There are risks there around those funds being siphoned off by corrupt actors. There are risks in the procurement sort of space, again linked to supply chain fraud, as well as vendor management. And I think as a bank, if you provide services to cash-intensive businesses, those businesses are likely to have been impacted by COVID-19. And if you see that there are certain cash-intensive businesses that are booming in today's economy, if I were you, I'd go in and look at what's going on with that business, because it could be that it's being used as a money laundering front. And obviously cybercrime, again, which I think Olesya mentioned, there has been an increase in ransomware. There's a risk, obviously, of healthcare-related cybercrime. Individuals are frightened, and fraudsters are preying on that fear to impersonate members of the WHO, to gain sensitive information that can then be used to gain access to bank accounts and the like. So yeah, that paints a picture, Matthew.
So I think the question that's on everybody's mind at this time, if you will, is that given the intrinsic rise of risk that's induced by COVID-19 circumstances, including by the increase in government spend around solutions to the COVID-19 crisis, given what you've each described as the increase in regulatory permissiveness and willingness to allow new technologies to be applied to reduce that risk, and given the existence of these technologies, they've been developed. Many of these tools are already out there. They've been out there. I want to turn to each of you and ask, how do you assess the balance of these trends? Are we in a time when the vector could shift to use of technology in a more permissive way, in a way that begins to really bring down the risk of financial fraud, generally? I know that's a big question, but each of you has been in the trenches. I'm struck as I've read your resumes, how each of you has been committed to fighting for honest business for decades. And you've been in the trenches. You've been working these systems and these tools, and you've been fighting with bad actors. And so you have a feeling, you must have a sort of personal sense of what this time means for you professionally. Do you perceive that the vector could shift? Do you perceive many challenges ahead? What's new about today's circumstances that helps you as an individual professional? Let me put the question that way. And let's start with you, Natya.
Well, that's a very interesting question. That's a question that requires a very long answer, and I will try to be as short as possible. Well, there are many challenges ahead, and I do think that the vector has shifted. And as Samar said, there is no going back. The genie is outside of the bottle now, and now there is no way to put technology back where it was before COVID-19. So my answer to your question would be that the regulators, the standard setting bodies, the FATF, they will have to learn how to live with the new technologies. They will have to learn how to identify what is good service, what is the service that provides sufficient security, and what is bad service. And eventually the regulators will become better and better at that. Well, FATF itself already stated that within, I think, 5 years' time, 60% of transactions will be done on face-to-face. I think this number has already, the projection will be much higher looking from today's perspective. So basically, I would say that if now FATF evaluates, suggests to evaluate non-face-to-face business as high risk, with the increased knowledge and increased application of high security standards to the new technology, this evaluation will change, and that the risk evaluation will also decrease, medium or lower risk depending on the technology. And for me professionally, this also means now being on the side of the provider of new technology that helps clients to identify helps financial institutions to identify their clients. This means that we have to stay committed to the quality, we have to stay committed to the security, and as criminals and money launderers start to learn new ways to launder money and to receive, to launder money through official financial channels, the technology also needs to invest in feature-rich and security-relying technology. Therefore, for me, as a lawyer, I know how much effort has been put in the product that my company has developed. It's called Identimat, and I know that it's not the final product. For us, as the providers of the technology, it means that we will have to, well, at least the guys in the back office, the guys who work on the development of the product, for them it means that they will have to put every effort to ensure that the technology remains safe with the increasing challenges and risks that it faces. Another challenge that I think is important in relation to the shifting vector that you mentioned, Matthew, is that it's important to maintain trust in the technology because, well, if the technology is there and if it's not, there will always be someone, as Olesya said, there will always be someone who will use technology for bad intentions. But it's important for financial sector, for the regulators, for the standard setters to ensure that the trust in the services, in the financial services provided through new technologies is maintained. And for us, for a small company with big ambitions, it is an opportunity. If the trust is there, it means that we can provide safe and sound distant identification services for our clients. And of course, we will work every day for that. We will familiarize ourselves with new legal standards, new demands from the market, and of course, new technological tools to make sure that our technology remains safe.
Thank you. Excellent. Olesya, what's your personal view of whether the vector shifting and whether you feel as a professional that the trends that you've been both fighting and trying to sort of promote, you know, on the negative and the positive side, what's the balance of those today for you personally?
If short, I would say such a way. Do you remember non-Petya? Yes, and
Yes.
its influence on the cybersecurity, how much attention all organizations started to pay to the questions of cybersecurity. A few years have passed, and here in Ukraine, we have seen that this interest became lower. So for me, the COVID-19 is the same non-Petya, but for digital technologies in all areas of our life, not only financial services. Everything that could be made remotely, further it will be made remotely. And of course, all new trends concerning remote identification of people that just started in Ukraine to implement. Just one bank have implemented before COVID face recognition. During COVID, we have such a new initiative of our national bank that has allowed remote identification without visiting banks' branches. And for 2 weeks, it has worked. Some banks are very active. They have implemented this technology. Banks say yes, we can do it, but they do this. So it is not fair for our banks; they are out of it. So with such mess, it is now here. But I think that COVID-19 is a great stimulus to change things. Sorry.
Thank you very much. That was very helpful. And Samar, before I turn to you, I want to invite the audience, if they're so inclined, to start submitting questions through the chat function. We'll be opening the floor for questions for this very experienced group of panelists in a moment. And so Samar, give us your personal take on the trend lines, both positive and negative, and whether we're at a moment of strategic opportunity for this industry, for the compliance industry.
Yeah, I'll take your last question first. I think absolutely yes. We are at that point where there are lots of opportunities to improve regulatory compliance and also to make the fight against financial crime more effective. And these risk vectors that we've been talking about, they do have the potential to shift. But as long as the new technology is proven to be reliable, number one, and also number two, that firms aren't retrospectively fined by regulators for taking innovative approaches that perhaps subsequently fail to identify and report suspicion, especially once the crisis, the present crisis has lifted. So I think financial institutions will need to be, I guess, circumspect in the use of these new tools during COVID-19, to the extent that they are contemplating taking innovative approaches and using digital ID, to, I guess, materially deviate from their standard process for onboarding customers, for example. They just need to make sure that they are doing, a formal risk assessment of the tools and the business processes. They thoroughly test the tools to satisfy themselves that they work and that they're reliable, because no regulator is going to give you their seal of approval on any particular tool. It's down to the regulated entity to make sure that it works and that they're able to confirm the identity of the individual, to their satisfaction, that they meet regulatory requirements, and then to document why they believe that the tool is effective and supports good financial crime compliance. And I think if they're able to do all of those things, they'll be in a better position to not only improve their internal processes, but also to, I guess, fight financial crime more efficiently and effectively, and remain in compliance with regulations. That would be my perspective, Matthew.
Samar, let me stick with this point for a minute and ask you, do you believe that we know more at this time about who is behind the networks and how they're organized? It's often the case that we forget in the corruption fighting business that it takes groups of people to conduct these very sophisticated schemes. And those groups of people are organized in informal networks, and they share certain values, and they also share certain technologies and know-how, and they're, as Olesya has described, they're very busy these days coming up with new ways to penetrate the vulnerabilities in the system, let's say. But my question really is, as a general trend, do you think the industry is becoming smarter about how to use big data, how to use digital ID and other sort of basic, and other new technologies to understand who these networks are, penetrate these networks, and upset these networks?
Yeah, I think they are, and I think the trend in certainly the larger multinational financial institutions, those that have perhaps a bigger budget, and indeed bigger data pools, they've got larger client bases, are using data analytics proactively, and they have been doing so for several years, to undertake network analysis and identify bad actors, around anti-money laundering, bribery and corruption, wildlife trafficking, as well as fraud and sanctions evasions. And big data offers the potential to enable these large institutions to anticipate financial crime. I think what I've seen certainly in the banks that I've worked for or within is a sort of reactive approach, where they look at transactions that have occurred, and then they have looked to identify, whether any suspicious activity occurred that they need to then report on. And I think the key is turning those risk factors into predictive analysis, so that that those institutions can then, I guess, be at the forefront to prevent the financial crime to begin with. And these new innovative data analytic routines are enabling them to create bigger grey lists, to feed these lists into local task forces that have been set up. In the UK, we have the Joint Money Laundering Intelligence Task Force, which is a public-private partnership, and it involves banks, it involves law enforcement and regulators sitting together to talk through how they can disrupt financial crime. These, I think, intelligence-led investigations is using these vast pools of data is definitely proving to be very productive in identifying bad actors and potentially suspicious activity, for sure.
Thank you very much. Very interesting. Natia, I'm going to ask you a slightly different version of that same question, which is how do you feel about Georgia today? You've worked in both the public and private sector. You've been a leader in the field. Do you feel that Georgia is positioned to become sort of a model of how to fight financial crime using good regulations and new technologies?
I think Georgia has everything to become a role model on using new technologies, including new fintech and regtech. We have great regulator, we have great banks, other financial institutions. Our two largest banks are listed on the stock exchange. So our financial sector is huge. And I think that the recent pandemic has demonstrated that Georgia is really on the forefront of technology in relation to financial services. Really, I have seen a lot of fora discussions, panels, presentations on a new fintech that could facilitate work of the financial sector in this distressful situation. So I think that new regulations that have been introduced that will be amended inevitably throughout the development of the technology will give Georgia the opportunity to become the leader, the role model of the technology, at least in the post-Soviet. Well, we have bigger ambitions than that, but well, let's be modest here. I think that, we have everything to satisfy this requirement.
Olesya, let me give you the floor for just a minute because we're about to end the session. On Ukraine, you have a president and a government that's devoted to digitizing government. Do you believe that they are able to use this opportunity to push that and accelerate those reforms that they've been making since the new president came into power a year ago?
When new president came, yes, it was his message that we will move to digitalization. But independently of his will or will of our government, it's such trend that you cannot resist it, even if it is not very well going in the country. It's a general trend, and even if they do nothing, we move to digitalization. We can't do nothing to stop this because these services cannot be used. There are a lot of new services that were not existing before, but they were created by very smart persons to catch this trend. There are a lot of remote services, and they are digitalized independently of will or unwillingness of our president and parliament. I think that trend is more powerful than any vision of high persons.
Well, that's a very good way to segue to the conclusion here. First, I want to thank each of these terrific panelists. I want to thank you for the years you've devoted to fighting the good fight. And I also want to once again, thank StrategEast, thank the founder, Anatoly Motkin, thank Ksenia Zaretsky for organizing this particular event. StrategEast has done a very good job of adapting to the circumstances of COVID-19 and promoting an agenda around changing the culture of government service in the Eurasia region, in the post-Soviet space, using new technologies, using human capital, and helping to integrate these countries into Western markets. And this has been, this event has been part of that leadership on the part of StrategEast. So I want to thank them for organizing this great panel. It's been a privilege and honor to be able to work with you today. And I hope everybody in the audience has enjoyed it as much as I have.
It's been an honor indeed, and I hope we have brought some light to businesses that are struggling with the labyrinths of the regulations.
Yeah.
I just want to say that the opportunities are there, and there is an enabling environment with sufficient risk controls. There is an opportunity, and I hope to see it.
Well said. Well, thank you, everybody. I think it's time to sign off. So have a good day and be safe and well, everybody.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye now.